Good morning, good morning, good morning. Hello, everyone. Thank you again for getting up with us today. It is our first Meet Your Mayor. Welcome all of our District 1 residents. I am Matt Griffith, Community Representative for Office of Mayor Gloria. I represent Council Districts 1, 4, and 7, along with our BIPOC constituencies, our seniors, and public safety. Again, it's my honor to welcome all of you here, and I have the pleasure of being able to introduce Councilmember Joe LaCava. Councilmember LaCava.
Thank you, Matt, for the introduction, and thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your Saturday to be here today. I hope everyone is safe and healthy. So let's get into it. From a citywide perspective, I serve on several council committees, including Land Use and Housing, Environment, Infrastructure, and Audit. And I also serve on the San Diego River Park JPA Board and alternate on the San Diego Community Power. My focus coming into office has been on addressing and closing old issues to clear the slate so we can tackle all that is facing the city today and tomorrow. I'm happy to report that the mayor and I are on the same page regarding public health and assisting San Diegans and small businesses navigate the pandemic. As you know, there is much happening right here in our district. In general, we are in need of more diverse mobility options, affordable housing, and preparations for climate change resiliency. And just a week ago, I held 2 town halls to collect your feedback on the gas electric franchise agreements. We're still taking your input via your emails and from the city's online survey. Let's take a moment and drill down to our individual D1 communities. In Del Mar Heights, I'm advocating for the traffic signal on Del Mar Heights Road and how to create usable park space. I'm also seeking solutions and funding for flood prevention and management in Sorrento Valley. In Carmel Valley and Pacific Islands Ranch, I'm working closely with traffic engineers to initiate a comprehensive traffic study. And I have reopened the Village Center Loop Road conversation. In Del Mar Mesa, I'm working on maintenance and a potential backdoor access road. I'm facilitating communication between the community and city staff regarding a proposed fire station. In Torrey Hills, it is about protecting the natural open space and keeping an eye on new development. In La Jolla, monitoring the shoreline parks and the reservoir project, as well as developing traffic calming measures and so much more. For University City, it is protecting the community's unique open spaces and monitoring their community plan update. And as an issue that used to belong to University City, but now is spreading across the district, I am forming a coalition of elected leaders to address those flights from Marine Corps Air Station that veer off the approved flight path. In fact, my office is meeting with Senator Dianne Feinstein next week. And not to be forgotten, I'm working with UC San Diego on a variety of issues and building new relationships with the students. Of course, all District 1 would like to see less potholes, improved public safety, faster utility undergrounding, and better infrastructure. As you can see, 2 months in, and we are very, very busy on district issues. With so much to do and with such pressures facing our city, I'm pleased that the mayor is taking the time to engage with District 1, to hear your voices, answer your questions, and address your concerns directly. You know, this new level of partnership and transparency from our city's leadership is authentic, productive, and timely. I have a much more open relationship with this mayor and the city departments than my predecessor faced with the prior administration. Why? It is due to Mayor Gloria's commitment to community engagement that he and I stand here together to listen and learn from you this morning. I was fortunate to work with the mayor during his days as a council member and interim mayor when I was a civilian, and now we're working together as fellow elected officials. With that said, please give a warm Zoom welcome to Mayor Todd Gloria. Mayor?
Thank you so much, Council Member, and good morning, everyone. Joe, I really appreciate that introduction and your partnership in this morning's town hall meeting. You know, Joe and I were talking in the waiting room just before that, you know, typically these are done separately, right? That the council member hosts their town hall, the mayor may or may not host a town hall at all. Doing this together is what I think Joe and I both want to communicate, which is a collaboration between the legislative and executive branches of this government, where we're both focused on the same priorities of keeping your neighborhood safe, repairing our infrastructure, tackling the big issues facing our community. And I have to tell you, Joe's been a great partner in this particular effort. Joe, I was sharing with some folks the other day in your district. When I'm asked to list the new council members, I often admittedly forget that you're among them because you've hit the ground running with such a strong command of the concerns and needs of your district that it's often doesn't feel like you're talking to a new council member. It's like you're talking to a seasoned council member. And I really appreciate your partnership and quite grateful to have you at City Hall. I want to give the people who've tuned in this morning a quick update from the mayor's office, and then we have a facilitated Q&A session that we'll get to, being assisted by Matt Griffin, who introduced himself at the beginning. For those of you who are on this call, interested in following up on a host of issues, maybe you don't get your question asked this morning, or maybe you think of something after we log off, Matt's your point of contact. And I'm sure he'll put his contact information in the chat so that you all can be in direct communication with him. Matt's doing a phenomenal job. I'm so grateful he's a part of our team at City Hall. He's backed up by several other members of my team who are here today to make sure we're taking notes and following up on the concerns that are raised. But again, please be in touch with Matt Griffin as your point of contact for Council District 1. So the quick update from the mayor's office, and then we'll get to your questions. Obviously, the top priority right now is COVID-19. It's where I spend most of my time. It's where most of my staff spends their time. There's no greater challenge that we're faced right now than defeating this virus and getting back to some level of normalcy. I'm really proud of the partnership that the city has built with the County of San Diego, starting first at our convention center, which many of you know has been converted into an interim homeless facility that has now successfully transitioned over 1,200 San Diegans into permanent housing, to now at Petco Park, where we are partnering with the county and UC San Diego Healthcare and the San Diego Padres to provide thousands of doses of COVID-19 vaccinations. In fact, about this time last week, we hit our 100,000th vaccinated San Diegan at that site. On Monday, we crossed the 500,000 mark in our county. Governor Newsom came to San Diego to mark that occasion with us. We're leading the state where this is concerned. But of course, we're not. As your mayor, I am not happy with where we're at. We have to do more. I won't be satisfied until every San Diegan who wants a vaccine gets it. And to that end, and with the partnership of the City Council, we have been authorized by the state to be a direct recipient of vaccines. Previous to about 2 weeks ago, the county was the recipient of vaccines locally. The city is now receiving small doses, small quantities of vaccine. We're distributing that at our municipal gym in Balboa Park. We have vaccinated, I'm going to say, somewhere around 2,000 people at this point, and with an eye of doing more. My vision for this is for us to be assistive of the county. The county has opened a variety of super stations across the community, most recently yesterday at the Del Mar Fairgrounds. But we want to fill in some of the gaps. We want to provide assistance where we have greater need, say in our South Bay communities, or at senior living facilities where we have people who are not able to be mobile to these vaccination stations. And we can send some of our firefighters, our lifeguards, our EMTs to do that directly on site. And here's where I want to give a shout out to our city employees. You would be so proud of the fact that our city employees have repurposed themselves, whether they're librarians who are helping to run the homeless shelter at the convention center, or the IT people who are helping to manage the lines at the municipal gym in Balboa Park. Everyone understands defeating the pandemic is our top priority. They're acting accordingly, and we're making progress. But again, we won't be happy until we solve this problem entirely. To that end, I want to acknowledge the fact that many people have not only been harmed by the pandemic from their health perspective, but also from their economic well-being. Many San Diegans have lost their jobs. Others have had their hours slashed, their wages cut, and the impacts are pretty obvious. Of course, many of the impacts are also to our small local businesses. To that end, we have launched a Shop Local SD campaign, where we're encouraging San Diegans that as they spend their money, I ask that you do as much as you can to try and keep that local. That keeps local businesses in business, allows them to hire more San Diegans, and keeps more of our tax revenues here locally. The city of San Diego is going to lead by example. We're asking our purchasing and contracting department to also be assistive. You know, what you and I may spend in a run to Costco is one thing. What the city spends on contracts and services in a year is a significantly higher sum for most people. So we want to lead by example where that's concerned. To assist with this, I'm working with the Chamber of Commerce and with the Economic Development Corporation to soon launch a web portal where we can allow local businesses to advertise their services and to help San Diegans find their way to keeping their money local. To help people with the economic impacts of COVID-19. I appreciate the City Council's recent extension of the eviction moratoriums for both residential and commercial properties. Thank you, Councilmember LaCava, for your support of that measure. This provides freedom from eviction, at least for a period longer. We'll keep watching this situation. But I want to be clear. I know often the answer is, well, that's all well and good for the tenant. What about for me as a landlord or the person carrying the mortgage? Well, my team, with the support of the City Council, has successfully petitioned and received nearly $90 million for a rent relief fund. That is money that is coming from both the state and the federal government to the City of San Diego. Our Housing Commission is administering those dollars, and that is going to allow us to not just have the moratorium, but to help extinguish some of that back rent that is critical for making mortgages, for making ends meet for some of the landlords. I want to make sure everyone knows that right now we have an interest list on the Housing Commission's website. That's sdhc.org. So if you're a tenant that's COVID impacted and having difficulty making your rent, or if you're a landowner who may have tenants in this position, I would encourage the tenants that you work with to go to that website and sign up for the interest list. Now, some of you may be saying an interest list, that's not a check, and you're right. But right now what we're doing is waiting for explicit guidance from the state and federal government on the rules that will govern these dollars that we've received. And so we want to be prepared that when we get that final guidance, that we can start cutting those checks to take care of business. And so that interest list right now will allow us to move swifter when we have the program rules in place. It also will help us identify maximum need. I don't want to leave one nickel on the table. And so understanding where the need is, quantifying it, and being able to follow up on it's important. Here's where I also want to mention some of these dollars are permitted for use on unpaid utility debt. So maybe a water bill that's in past due, et cetera. Again, the Housing Commission is capturing that data so that we can make sure we make the fullest use of those dollars. The last thing I want to talk to you about is we've talked about the pandemic, talked about the economic impacts on individuals. And I want to be really explicit that the economic impacts are not just to individuals, but also to the city. Joe and I are facing a fairly significant financial challenge with the city's current budget and with our next fiscal year budget. I want to give you some perspective. When Joe and I were sworn in back in December, the city was looking at a roughly $45 million mid-year budget deficit, meaning $45 million hole that opened up in our current year budget, the one we're in right now. Today, with a couple of weeks passing, that number is now $84 million. It gives you a sense for how rapidly the economic environment is shifting and not in our favor. Why is this happening? Well, I would understand that many people often want to say, there's the city hall is being profligate. They're not watching my dollars well. Any of you know Joe LaCava, right? You know that we're pretty spendthrifty, right? We're thrifty. We are. I would call myself cheap. I won't call Joe that because that's not always a nice word. We, in our $1.5 billion general fund budget, we were within $300,000 of our budgeted expenses. So that's pretty good, right? $300,000 is a lot of money, but in the course of $1.5 billion, you recognize that we're holding the line on spending. Where we're not doing well is on revenue. And for those of you that have driven by a hotel, motel in our city recently, you'll see a lot of lights are not on. And every room that is not occupied is TOT that is not being forwarded to the city of San Diego. And as a consequence, our revenues have plummeted substantially. What does that mean? Well, it means that we have to balance our budget in the current year, that $84 million problem, and we must solve for next year's projected budget deficit, what right now is somewhere around $150 million. To put that in perspective, $84 million is more than we spend in a year to run our library system, and $150 million is more than we spend in an entire year to run our park and recreation department. This is big. This is substantial. And I'll tell you that what I'm hoping for, and hope is not a strategy, but what I'm hoping for is that the federal government will adopt President Biden's proposed economic relief package. That proposal includes $350 billion for state and local governments to address exactly what I just described to you. Economic depression that is a recession that is causing revenues to plummet, which has the potential of impacting city services. The previous economic relief bill, the one that was passed in December, actually excluded cities from receiving direct assistance. President Biden's proposal is inclusive of cities. And there's an article in today's paper that addresses this that I would encourage you to take a look at. Point is, if that particular bill is enacted before we have to adopt our budget, while it won't solve all of our problems, and we'll probably still need to make some modest reductions, it's not the same as having to solve for 86 million plus 150 some odd million. You understand pretty quickly how difficult that's going to be. To give you some comparison, this is roughly similar to what I was dealing with when I was on the city council during the Great Recession. The numbers are roughly equivalent. And if you may remember, at that time, we had to do things like brown out fire stations, pair libraries for closure. It was some really not good cuts. I mean, these are really impactful to communities. I don't want to speak for the council member, but I think I know his heart to know that he wants to avoid that as much as I do. We understand that right now, as times are tough, many people are turning to the city for access to libraries so they can get to those computer labs to apply for jobs. That in distance learning with our kids, they need access to this free Wi-Fi and lending of books. We know that those EMTs and firefighters and lifeguards who are currently at Petco Park or in the Muni Gym passing out vaccines, we can't have them not working. We need them to work more. And so I'm very hopeful that the federal government will pass that relief package and that which will provide direct assistance to San Diego. If they don't, we will meet our requirement under the law to balance the city's budget. But as I've already mentioned to you, it will not be done well. And I have to imagine many of the questions today will really focus on the areas where we haven't been hitting expectations currently in terms of road repair, trash collection, et cetera. And so you recognize that if we're currently not hitting those marks and we have to reduce our spend even dramatically because of the recession, how much worse this can get. So this is where I say, when you get off this Zoom, drop a line to your congressman, your senator. This is where I should tell you that Congressman Peters has been a champion, wonderful, and very proactively supportive of President Biden's proposal. But we could use some more support to get that done sooner rather than later. I'm going to wrap up there because I want to leave plenty of time for comments and for questions. I would just say that there are a host of issues at the city. COVID-19 and the resulting economic impacts are at the top of mind right now. Homelessness and housing affordability continue to be major concerns. We had a homelessness and housing affordability crisis before the pandemic. We have one that's going on right now, as I mentioned, relative to tenant relief. We are likely to have a worse problem after the pandemic if we don't do more to assist tenants with back rent, if we don't do more to help folks make ends meet. And so that's a top of mind concern. Infrastructure continues to be a driving concern. I'm proud that I was able to be elected unanimously to be the vice chair of SANDAG. When I think about District 1 and the fact that you all are getting a trolley line extension under construction, maybe some of you are at home listening to some construction noise right now, you understand how important it is to have San Diego at the table and in a leadership position. SANDAG does that work by becoming the vice chair of that organization. That gives me a better opportunity to advocate for your community as big projects like the Midcoast Trolley Extension or some of the I-5 improvements that are happening continue on. And then I mentioned housing and homelessness, infrastructure, climate continues to be a main concern. Councilmember LaCava mentioned the franchise agreement, which has some connections to our climate action plan. I want to mention to you that we'll be updating our landmark climate action plan this year. We're working to create a climate equity fund to help make sure that every community in the city benefits from green jobs and climate improvements. And we're advancing an environmental justice plank for our city's general plan also this year. So tackle COVID, get our economy going again, focus on housing and homelessness, invest in our infrastructure, and tackle climate. That's the priorities of my administration. I hope that aligns well with your concerns. And with that, Matt, if I can toss it back to you so that we have plenty of time for Councilmember LaCava and I to answer questions. I look forward to the questions and appreciate this chance to be in direct communication with so many of you this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So right now, I have the opportunity to bring up one of our first panelists, direct question, Mr. Barry Bernstein. You can unmute yourself and introduce yourself and ask your question.
Okay, good morning, Mayor, and it's very great to see you again. You are always a wonderful guest and visitor in University City, and of course, the same to you, Councilmember LaCava, and all those who may be listening this morning. Councilmember LaCava, you did mention at the very early part of our meeting this morning, one of the issues which I'd like, maybe if you have time, further clarification. In University City, as probably in quite a few of our other communities, the issues related to the aircraft at Miramar MCAS has not really improved. I look forward to hearing more about a coalition, as you described, amongst others who may have an impact related to ensuring safety. And that's what it's all about. Locally, we have a small group of residents who live about a half a mile from the runway. It's called CASA. It stands for Citizens Advocating Safe Aviation. But to make a long story short, the university community for nearly a decade, and certainly after the tragic fatality accident in 2008, we have failed to establish the communications with the command. By that I mean just meeting with the residents, ensuring safety, departure paths that exist. It's those times that is of concern. And of course, I don't think we can forget the F-35 aircraft, which is known to be considerably noisy, and what that impact may have if the proper types of adjustments aren't made through the FAA, air traffic control, and of course the command at Miramar. I know that's an awful lot, but if you could address part of that, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Barry, and thank you for your leadership and volunteer work in University City over many years. Yeah, I did mention that. I have a philosophy that, if you're not making progress with the things that you're doing, that it's time to look at it differently. And clearly what we need is more allies on our side. As you know, I did meet with the folks with CASA, and I am getting phone calls from our surrounding communities that this is a larger issue. And for those listening in, as Barry mentioned, this is not just a noise issue, it's a safety issue. And the request is quite simple. Let's keep the aircraft within the approved flight path. It's just that simple. And so, as I mentioned, I have met with Congressman Mike Levin. I'm going to be meeting with Senator Dianne Feinstein next week, as well as Congressman Scott Peters. And there are actually elected officials from surrounding small cities that want to join in that conversation. And I'm sure the mayor and his team will be helping us as well, because we need to change the tone of the conversation. It has impacts in so many ways. For those of you who don't know, our good friend Andy Gurney sends us an email every time an aircraft goes outside the approved flight path. And so we're building a mountain of receipts that we can use in talking to the Department of Defense and all that chain of command, as well as the FAA and their newly understand role in this, to be able to change the tone of the conversation and get results. All we can do is bring the full weight of our local resources to this conversation, and hopefully we can see some change, because I'm very concerned about not only what the day-to-day reality, but how it affects our community plan update. We're adopting land uses and densities, assuming that people will stay in the approved flight path. And if they're not, it is an action that the city will have to take. So it is a new day, a new era, and we're going to make a difference.
Thank you, Councilmember LaCava. And we have another question from Mary Monk. She's not able to join us this morning, but this is for Mayor Gloria. She asks, Mayor Gloria, with such beautiful parks like our Kellogg Park, what can be done about the large amounts of trash we continue to see in our parks?
Mary, thank you for that question. And I think I received the same question the other night at the La Jolla community meeting. What I shared then, and I'll repeat today because I think it's important, particularly with this larger group that we have, is that issue is not reserved just to our shoreline parks or to those in La Jolla. Sadly, this is a problem across the city. And whether it's the folks in Balboa Park, earlier this morning, I was down in Nestor. There was also an issue in that community. And I actually see that as opportunity in the sense that, when it's one community fighting for a particular issue, it's difficult to get that prioritized. When the whole of the city is identifying the same issue, I think by nature of politics being addition, you're able to see some change on that. I'd refer you to the comments I made a moment ago about the city's budget. If we're already not meeting your expectations with regard to trash pickup in our parks with our current budget, you can imagine what it looks like with a reduction of the size that might be necessitated due to our current budget deficit. What I would say in terms of what can be done, sort of three things. There's some budget advocacy, because even with reductions, we're still going to spend over $1 billion next year to run this city. And it may be that we can prioritize this if that's the will of the community. That's not without impact, right? In a budget with less money, we're going to be making reductions. If we want to improve services somewhere else, it has to come from somewhere else to balance it. But that's again a possibility because of the citywide nature of this concern. The second thing I would mention is that we have a newly formed park foundation that, given that this is about trash collection in parks, although I'd argue it's also true in other settings like streetscapes and business districts, we can potentially ask the partnership of that foundation, which is really raising philanthropic dollars to help provide a higher level of service in particularly impacted parks. And I think that's a conversation that we could have with this newly formed foundation, who, by the way, are helping us right now to deploy Wi-Fi services at recreation centers, recognizing the times we find ourselves in and understanding the digital divide is harming our children, but really everybody. And so we identified that issue for them to help solve. Maybe we can work with them to help solve this issue. And then the last thing I'd mention is that to the extent that some communities, an example I'd often give is Little Italy, have an assessment district in their community that provides a higher level of service than what the city provides. That is often a way to try and get to that service level that's mentioned. We are picking up the garbage, but not at the frequency that the crowds demand. You all have seen people flocking to parks as a safe way to recreate during the stay-at-home order. To provide a higher level of service, these are often ways to do it. So budget advocacy, working with our philanthropic partners, and then a potential solution for an assessment district. These would be things that come to mind. And that's probably in sequential order, given that the budget is a current conversation. The foundation is working on other things at the moment, but we could reprioritize them in this direction. And an assessment district often takes months or years to form.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Next question is going to be coming from Diane. Diane, if you could go ahead and unmute yourself and introduce yourself as well. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, Mayor Gloria and Councilmember LaCava. Thank you so much for meeting with us, and congratulations to both of you on your victory. And I can see you're both really jumping into the leadership role. We need strong leaders. From a community perspective, they have been missing in action. This is not for Ms. Bree. She was fabulous. Our previous mayor was missing in action as far as the community groups were concerned. I'm president of the La Jolla Community Planning Association, and one of my ongoing concerns is our infrastructure deficit. I was taking notes on your numbers on budget backlog, and I understand the problem, but this has been kicked down the road for decades. We have a compounded deficit that is not getting any better, and nobody seems to be even discussing it. So I'm really pleased to see that our council member is head of infrastructure. And my question is, do we have a plan going forward over the next, say, decade of how to dig out of this infrastructure deficit? I've been working with 2 capital improvement projects very recently. The first thing I'd like to say is you've got some fabulous staff, and I would very much like to give a shout out to some of the folks that have reached out to me from your staff who have been very helpful and very cooperative in working with us as a community. So the first one's going to go out to Bilal Orkat, who is a project engineer in Capital Works. We are working with him on the reservoir project, reservoir replacement. And that's a piece of infrastructure that is past its prime and desperately needs to be replaced. The problem is, how do we do that without destroying the open space that it's sitting in the middle of and creating massive upset for our neighborhoods? So I really want to thank you and your staff for reaching out to us for some help in how we have that project go forward and do it in a sensitive way that takes the concerns of the neighborhood into effect. The other 2 people are Dan Nutter, another engineer, and Alejandra Gonzalez Nava in the bicycle facilities program. And we've been partnering with the University City Group on planning for the Coastal Rail Trail segment on Gilman. And that is going to need some help. Councilmember LaCava, this is your district. Your two planning groups have reached across. We're shaking on working together and getting a really good plan for that, that bike trail that looks further at the division of the right of way so we can slow traffic as well as get those lanes in there. And then let's see. And then of course, Matt, who's wonderful. Thank you so much for bringing him on board. It's lovely to have him. He's been very, very responsive. So that said, we really like what we're seeing so far from your staff, reaching out to us and using us to help solve problems. However, in dealing with these capital projects, the looking at where does the money come from and how do we get it spent and where does it go? The budget's bad. The issue with the maintenance assessment districts is really problematic, because what I was told in trying to get a planted median on Gilman was that we would have to form a maintenance assessment district to plant trees, and that this would be a small area. We have a maintenance assessment district. I've been chatting with folks both in the Bird Rock area and in the village. They can't extend their boundaries, and we will have all these little maintenance districts to care for this park or that public thing. This is not going to work. It's not a way to get anything done, and it's just tying up more red tape. So do we have anything more broad and visionary to deal with the deficit?
Well, thank you, Diane, and thank you for your leadership and the collaborative processes that you've built across La Jolla. And I think you've got about 18 questions somewhere buried in your remarks.
Sorry.
So
Sorry.
we can have a separate conversation about maintenance assessment district. As you know, I formed two of them here in La Jolla. But I think to your other question about what are we going to do about infrastructure, we'll be holding two budget town halls in May, where we'll have the independent budget analysts come out and talk about some of the mystery of how the city does budgets and the different pots of money. What Mayor Gloria talked about earlier in some of the daunting numbers in terms of revenue shortfall is what we call the general fund. And that's kind of our operation administration component, the day-to-day operations of our city. Then we talk about infrastructure, and even that I'm going to split in two. Part of it is sewer and water. And that's where the reservoir falls in. That's where the sewer pipe replacement, the water pipe replacements get handled. And that is all funded by the ratepayers. And as the city council heard this week in a report from the mayor's staff, we don't see any deficits because the ratepayers pay the funds and allow us to do the infrastructure improvements that we need to do. The other component is everything else, right? The rec centers and streets and storm drains and fire stations, libraries, and on and on and on. That's where we have a real challenge. And as you described accurately, Diane, past administrations have been a bit overwhelmed and have kicked the can down the road. And we all know that when you don't do repairs, they simply get more expensive. Old facilities get older and therefore become to the point where you can't repair them, you have to replace them, and they become a capital improvement program. And now the report this week was that our 5-year projection, just our 5-year projection, has a $2.3 billion deficit. Now, that's pretty daunting, $2.3 billion. It's not a $64,000 question anymore, it's a multi-billion-dollar question. And we're going to have to decide what our priorities are. And I think the mayor made a reference to that. What kind of San Diego do we want? However we got here, we are here today. And we're looking at a future that is just going to become increasingly, the deficit is going to be larger. And I always like to emphasize, being the engineer, that the 2.3 is only for a specific set of projects that we've identified. It is not every project that we need to do. There are a number of studies that are happening in our city in which we don't even have a price tag of what it will cost to take care of those issues. A lot of our facility assessments are now 5-6 years old, and they have to be updated. And the thing that always strikes at my heart is that, remember all those facilities and infrastructures we promised in our community plans? A lot of those have not been built, and we don't include that in the deficit. So it is a very daunting picture. But with this council and this mayor, I think we have the wherewithal to begin to have candid, transparent conversations, admit where we are, and talk about how we're going to tackle it. Just this week, the mayor's office presented and the city council supported asking the stormwater department to conduct a study of what our options are to raise the funds necessary to address stormwater. Now, people say, why stormwater? Stormwater, we know every time it rains in San Diego, our beaches and bays are closed. That's not acceptable. Every time it rains or some of our bigger storms, our streets are flooded, houses are flooded, our businesses are flooded. That's not acceptable. So stormwater will be one of the first conversations we have. And we'll look in about a year from now, we'll start seeing some options. And then it becomes the hard conversation for the mayor, for the city council, and then likely you, the voters, to decide what is our priorities and how are we going to tackle it. We have tough decisions, but I'm confident with the transparency and accountability that this new council, new mayor bring, that we're going to be able to tackle that. So it's going to be a long, slow slog, but we're going to get there. And I look forward to working with all of you.
Thank you, Councilmember. And lastly, this question is for Mayor Gloria. We have Dr. Griffith. If you can go ahead and unmute yourself and introduce yourself and ask your question, please.
Well, good morning. It's good to be here on a Saturday. I want to thank you for taking the time out to have this town hall for District 1. Congratulations, Councilmember LaCava. Congratulations, Mayor Gloria. It's just good to be here. Many of you may not know that Mayor Gloria and I opened a school together. We rung the bell at E3 Civic High in the public library. So we thank you that you're a champion for education. It's good to be in District 1 where we're educating at the Proy School, UC San Diego. And we are very interested to get back on campus and to get back safely, because obviously we're creating the next qualified workforce for the city. That's our job. So my question today is, we know that educators are in Tier 1B for the vaccination. Is there any conversation about the timeline? When that'll happen? Is it going to be moved up, accelerated? Because we believe that vaccinations are important for us to keep our schools safe. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. Helen, it's wonderful to see you. You put us all to shame as usual, looking that good this early in the morning. So thank you for being here, and particularly for what you do for our kids. You know, the Proy School is a fabulous educational institution. You know, it's in District 1, but it serves children from across our city. I've been there many, many times, and it's just a beautiful part of our community. Thank you for what you do there. To answer your question, yes, it's becoming a little bit clearer. You may have seen the County of San Diego announce, I believe it was a day or two ago, that they believe that they can get to the tier that includes teachers, 1B, in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So that's encouraging. But there are those of us, myself included, who have been advocating to advance teachers in that distribution, recognizing that our economy cannot reopen until our schools reopen, until children are back in the classroom and parents can understandably be able to focus on their work or get back to work. You know, we have chosen to prioritize other professions, understandably our healthcare workers, and they made all the sense in the world. But I think about the professions that are, I think, driving a lot of our ability to reopen or not. Teachers and educators more broadly are on that list. I joined a bipartisan group of California mayors earlier this week to send a letter to our governor asking him to prioritize our teachers. Right now, I think many of you know we are not receiving enough doses, period. They're just not being produced at the volume that we need as a country. The president and his administration has taken a series of steps to try and improve that. And as we anticipate that volume to increase, as we see new vaccines come on board, like the Johnson & Johnson single dose vaccine, I believe we'll be in a situation relatively soon that we'll have a more doses. And I want to take that incremental growth and drive it in those areas where they're most necessary. And it seems to me like educators should be where it's at. Again, on our current production level, with our current dosing levels, the county is projecting 2 to 3 weeks. I will tell you, I want to give you a little bit of hope. I think every time, all the conversations I've been in, the county has exceeded the timelines provided in a positive way, meaning to say that, you know, we opened up, we started with healthcare workers and opened to 75-year-olds within a week, and then to 65-year-olds about a week later. And all of this was sooner than what was originally forecasted. I think it's reasonable to maintain conservative timelines and then try and beat expectations. That's been our internal goal, and so far we've been able to do that. I will tell you that we did not receive all of our doses for next week's vaccinations. You probably saw that news story. And as a consequence, Tailgate Park is going to shut down for a couple of days next week. We believe it'll be back to full full steam by Wednesday. It's hiccups like that that are going to take that 2 to 3 week timeline and potentially push it out. But right now, I feel like we can reasonably start serving educators within the month. And if past is prologue, hopefully sooner than that.
Thank you, Mayor Gloria. So right now we have some pre-submitted questions that came from our RSVPs. I ask that if you and Councilmember LaCava can try and limit your answers or responses to about 2 minutes so that we can then also provide enough time for our live chat questions that we're collecting as well. So first question, Councilmember LaCava, this is going to be for you. It's from Ann Dines. Given the budget crisis, which we all assume is coming, what will be the fate of the parks given the competition from the needs of other departments like stormwater, which we just read about, the homeless, etc.? Will parks suffer because they are not considered as urgent or important as other current concerns?
Well, thank you for that question, and thank you for the volunteer work and the leadership you've provided in the community and the number of called self-help projects in which we've collected private dollars to do public improvements. We owe a debt of gratitude to the nonprofits that are willing to do that. I think it's fair to say that the parks are already suffering. When the mayor talks about the deficit and the cuts that were coming, we've already been cutting the departments. We already know that the park and rec department doesn't have the resources they need to do the job that we would hope to see out there in our city parks, shoreline parks, our open spaces. They do a remarkable work for the minimal resources that we give them. And I'm certainly grateful for Andy Field, the director, and his team that are out there every day trying to keep up with the ongoing operations and maintenance needs out there. I certainly have prioritized parks and open space in my budget memo, but when it comes down to it, it is going to be a very tough conversation. When you advocate for parks, someone next to you is going to be advocating for libraries, and someone's going to be advocating for repairing our streets, and et cetera, et cetera. And that will be where we'll make the tough conversations going forward. It is heartbreaking to see precious dollars being spent on building parks and then them not being able to be maintained. Many of you may have heard the Carmel Valley Park that the developer funded, but the city wouldn't allow it to open because they didn't have the staff to maintain it. We've seen a new park in Del Mar Mesa starting to fall in disrepair because there just isn't the resources. We are fortunate here in La Jolla where we have some generous donors. We have our maintenance assessment district that can take care of some of that. But it's going to be very tough conversations. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. We're going to have to decide what our priorities are, whether it's maintaining the park, something the trash cans, trimming the trees, and please add your voice and build coalitions to support the issues that you care about. But parks are very important to me. I'm very interested and will be advocating for trying to preserve the park and rec budget as lean as it is to at least begin to tackle some of these ongoing issues.
Thank you, Councilmember. And next question from Mayor Gloria. This is from Jody. She's from the La Jolla Village Merchants Association. Her question is, how long will the temporary order business permits be valid? Is this something you might allow beyond COVID?
So easy. It coincides with the state of emergency that we're under. So when the state of emergency ends is presumably when many of these will have to terminate their operation. So I don't have a firm deadline, but you'll see the council and the state continually sort of push that out as long as we're at the infection rates that we're at. In terms of after that, I would like to see outdoor dining continue. I think San Diegans have embraced it, and by God, we have the climate that supports it. We're currently in an emergency posture, though, right? We've allowed businesses to do this relatively swiftly. If it's made permanent, we're going to have to account for things like stormwater and safety and other concerns that have been less focused upon given the emergency posture. But I think it's totally doable. And we'll look forward to having public input and making sure that we can integrate these things well into the community. Again, I see San Diegans enjoying it. There's some details that need to be worked out. But I think if anything, we're going to be the hospitality industry is going to be the one that takes the longest to come back. I think even with vaccines and with a lower prevalence of the virus, people are going to still understandably be hesitant. and that will have real impacts on businesses in our community. I think continuation of outdoor dining beyond the state of emergency will be one strategy for keeping these businesses alive for the midterm, and then integrated into our neighborhood cultures for the long term. And again, working on the details will be something that we'll do with neighborhood advisory groups.
Thank you, Mayor Gloria. And Councilmember LaCava's question is from Jason. How will Councilmember LaCava promote the growth of San Diego's life science cluster, which is centered in District 1? What are your visions for the industry, and how can we show the nation that San Diego is a place for science?
Well, thank you for that question, Jason. And let's be clear, San Diego is the place for science. There cannot be any doubt about that. And the question is, how do we sustain it? We cannot sit on our laurels. We can't take anything for granted. We know that there are a lot of other employment centers across the country that are very hungry for the success that San Diego has enjoyed. And I can assure you that that we are not ignoring that challenge. We continue to be in close cooperation with the life sciences, both in terms of the businesses as well as the real estate interests that actually construct the laboratories and clean spaces that we see, especially up here in District 1, Torrey Pines, the Sorrento Mesa, and the North University City area. But we're doing much more than that. You're seeing a renaissance in downtown San Diego, where we're starting to see a lot of life sciences. As we begin to see the economy pivot, San Diego is on the cutting edge of reacting to that. So we're seeing the reimagining of the old Horton Plaza Retail Center into an innovative workspace focusing on life sciences. A project that was originally entailed for more office space along our waterfront has been bought by IQHQ. Gosh, I'm so glad I actually remembered those initials. I usually forget that. That will be focused on life sciences. And there's a couple of other major projects. And we're hoping that the attraction of downtown, which offers a different lifestyle, a close proximity to residential, good transportation, the gas lab, et cetera, will attract new businesses to come to San Diego. So we continue to work for that. We also, and this is in the very, very, very beginning stages, are looking for the opportunities to extend life science businesses south of 94. Life science is not only an important part of our economy, but it's a great jobs and a great experience for those that need access to a better economy. And so we're looking at an opportunity to relocate or to locate some of those life sciences south of 94 and to encourage employers to build housing so that the jobs are close to where people live, minimizing their transportation costs. So that's in the very early stages. We'll see where we can actually go with that. I'm sure that a lot of our STEM or education facilities are going to partner with us and help us make that come to reality. But stay tuned, and we hope to announce something soon.
Thank you, Councilmember. And Mayor Gloria, this question is along the same lines. This is coming from Dr. Allen. Why do we not have more vaccines? Can the pharma industry labs in District 1 help with the production of more vaccines?
It's a good question. As mentioned a moment ago, that's really the flaw in our current system. I'll give you an example. At the Balboa Park Municipal Gym, as I mentioned a moment ago, we're doing 200 or so a day, but the capacity of that facility is 1,000 a day. And the difference between the 200 we're providing and the 1,000 we can do is just the number of doses we receive. And so ramping up production so that communities like ours can get more is how we solve this problem sooner rather than later. In terms of what D1 can do, I mean, I honestly, D1's kind of already done its part in the sense that the incredible minds in that community have helped to create the vaccines that many of us didn't even think were possible a year ago when this all started. We were told it was going to take years and years to get a vaccine, and yet here we are in record time having them. My frustrations with the previous administration was that seemed to be mission accomplished was the creation of the vaccine. That was more like halftime. We needed to get this out into the communities, and that work has now fallen to the new administration. I will tell you that it's less about what a neighborhood or a city can do, but really what the nation can do. And I think you've seen President Biden taking some steps in a general direction to do this. The Defense Production Act allows the federal government to participate more directly in the production of vaccine. As I think you may know, the federal government is the ones that finance the research, are paying for the procurement, and that's part of why the doses are free, right? And reminder for anyone's charging, you know that you should not go there, or at least don't write a check. So I think it's less about a city initiative, more about advocacy by Councilmember LaCava and I and others to say, we're in, every chance I get. I think I had 3 meetings with the governor this week. Governor, we have space, we have capacity, whatever you can do. And, he relays that to the president. I will tell you that in the 65 days that I've been your mayor and Joe's been your council member, I think I've had 4 meetings with the Biden administration on issues related to COVID. So I think that hopefully that gives you some sense of the level of cooperation that's happening here, but there's a bit of a lag time. I do think that we're not far from the day where production has ramped up, additional vaccines have been authorized for use, and we're in a much stronger position to get this out more. My administration's focus right now is in working with communities to make sure that we can find those sort of deserts or holes, where we're not seeing as much participation, and trying to address the barriers. A lot of it's digital divide stuff. My parents were vaccinated last week. Applause to them for figuring out how to do this online. It was exceeded what I thought were their abilities, but they did it, and I'm very proud of them. But that's not the case for everybody. We have to address those folks, those people who are not mobile, et cetera, et cetera. So my focus is on delivery because we're on the ground. I'm leaving it to the folks up the food chain to work on the production. If we all do our part, I think that we can have something more resembling normalcy by the summer or fall, and that's certainly our goal.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And this will be a question for both Mayor Gloria and Councilmember LaCava. This is coming from Courtney. Courtney asks, how can citizens get more involved? How can our voices be heard in regards to topics such as police reform or other topics that we need to know about in our city?
You want to go first, Mr. Mayor? Or? Go ahead.
Well, you're the best example in the world of this because you don't even have to be elected to be involved. Joe LaCava has made a career out of this. And as I mentioned a moment ago, 65 days in, nothing LaCava's answers reflect 65 days worth of knowledge. That's like 6 decades of knowledge that you're working with there. Joe's doing a great job. Courtney, to answer your question, the first thing that comes to mind to me is opportunities like this, and there are multitude of these. Joe mentioned these already had a couple other town halls on other subject matters. But what I would put a plea out for, and then Joe, fill in any blanks that I may leave, among the many things that weren't accomplished in the previous administration were a whole lot of appointments to city boards and commissions. And these boards and commissions are the recognized advisory groups for the city. So when you see staff reports to the city council about a particular matter, often it'll have a paragraph about community participation. And that participation is often reflective of the comments and recommendations of these community groups. These community groups often require individual residents to apply to my office to be on those boards, and then many of those have to go before the city council for ratification. So very similar to what you may have seen from the federal level of government. You have a nomination and then a confirming. We do that too, and it's on a host of stuff. You mentioned police reform. The voters last November approved Measure B to reform our police review board. We're going to be bringing that forward to actually implement that, and that's going to require the appointment of new commissioners to do that work. And there's also a community advisory board for our law enforcement folks. There's a host of stuff. So my point is, when you get off this Zoom, go to sandiego.gov, look at the boards and commissions page, look at the vacancies that are out there. Everything from our tree advisory board to our sustainability board to our planning commission, et cetera, a lot of vacancies, a lot of opportunities to serve. Fill out that application online. Matt Gordon from my team, not to be confused with Matthew Griffin. Matt Griffin, Matt Gordon, 2 different people, 2 great guys. Matt Gordon is the leader of that effort, and if you reached out to him, he can let you know more about that process.
And then I'll add real quickly. First, the link that the mayor mentioned is now in the chat, and so you can follow that. I'll drill down a little more local from what the mayor described. In addition to the official boards and commissions that the city sponsors, and I had the pleasure of serving on several of those. There's also the more local, your planning groups, your town councils. We appreciate the individual voices from people like you, whether it is talking at a city council hearing or direct emails to our council offices to highlight the things that are happening on the ground that we may not be observing. But it is also valuable to be part of a larger conversation. There is so much more power in being part of an organization or a coalition of organizations that can be an advocate on particular issues. And I know sometimes it can be a little frustrating because you feel like your voices are not being heard, but you're actually changing the direction of the city and what we consider in terms of our options. It's not always very obvious, but I can tell you just even in the 65 days that I've been in office that I have seen a sea change in the direction of the city. It will take time to manifest and actually implement that. So don't be discouraged, stay involved. And all of the council members have individual community reps that also make it their mission to talk one-on-one with individuals. And you can go to our individual city council district websites and you'll see who the point person is in the community you live and reach out. But get involved, continue to be a passionate advocate for the things you believe in, and you are making a difference, even if it isn't quite apparent at the moment.
Thank you to you both. And so now, in the essence of time, we've had a lot of questions entered from the chat, but one that came up, direct messages and the chat, and a few emails that were sent in as well. This will be for both Councilmember LaCava and Mayor Gloria. We have the topic is about the franchise agreement that is we're talking about right here. So it says, how long of a deal do you plan to enter with SDG&E? What would it take to establish a public utility? And do you believe we can get to our goal of zero emissions by 2035 with SDG&E as our energy provider?
Well, I can tell you that, I know there's a little bit of confusion out there. We are getting to our goal of 100% energy because we are going to be starting the San Diego Community Power that is going to be the acquisition and delivery of power. The SDG&E will continue to use the sticks and wires, as I know some else say, that will deliver it to our homes and businesses. But we, through the Community Power, which is a joint powers authority, will be purchasing the energy. They're going to start their rollout this year. We're very exciting. So we're going to take command of where our energy is being procured. So I have a high degree of confidence that whoever is owning the sticks and wires, we're going to get to the 100% energy. And I'll kick it over to the mayor for the rest of the questions.
Yeah, and Joe, thanks for your service on community power, because that's right. That's where we sourced our energy from. The franchise agreement that we're talking about, that Councilmember LaCava has hosted town hall meetings for, is about the sticks and the wires, the folks who get the privilege of utilizing the public right of way to provide energy to our homes and to our businesses. SDG&E has had that franchise for the last 100 years. It expires, we negotiated a short-term extension, expires on June 1. My goal at this point is we are collecting community input right now to help inform what will be the request for the invitations to bid that we will issue in March, so next month. And then that will solicit bids by individual who want to bid. And then we will open those bids and presumably enter into a negotiation with whomever's there. The question was asked about term. I'll tell you the two previous franchises were 50 years in length, so two 50-year agreements. I suspect strongly this next one will be not that long. My focus is making sure that we get a deal that works best for the city, for ratepayers, and for our climate action plan goals. As Joe mentioned, I'm confident we can reach many of our goals because of San Diego Community Power. But to the extent that we have someone who's working in the energy space or energy delivery space to help us meet those goals, and I'm thinking about things like how do we make sure that we have more electric car or electric vehicle infrastructure in every community in the city. EVs cannot be reserved just for those who can afford Teslas, right? We need everyone to have participate in this, and our franchise agreement can help facilitate that. I don't want to, if you're saying he's not being specific enough, well, I'm not going to negotiate against the city's position here, right? I'm going to drive the hardest bargain I can to get the best possible deal for the city, recognizing that this agreement does pay the city a significant amount of money, and having where we started this conversation this morning, that becomes even more important than ever. And I believe this is a vehicle by which we can help finance our climate equity fund that we're hoping to start this year.
Thank you both. Well, as we see here it is 11 a.m. That means we are now concluding. I want to again thank you, Mayor Gloria and Councilmember LaCava, for providing this opportunity for District 1 residents and all to have this ability to voice their questions, be able to hear the state of District 1 along with the city update. Right now, again, I'll be showing the slide that has the contact information for all of District 1 staff, so that if there's any concerns or things that you would like to bring to their attention, please feel free to reach out. My information is there as well. Again, we want to say thank you guys for getting up with us on a Saturday morning. We look forward to seeing you again when we're out of the COVID space and seeing all the beautiful faces in District 1. But thank you again so much, Mayor Gloria, Councilmember LaCava, and everyone here. Thank you so much. We hope you guys have a good rest of your weekend. Take care.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Council District 1. Thank you, Councilmember LaCava.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you all that joined us.